just so you guys know. But anyway, so today is really more of an introduction to extension. And I was going to share with everybody the PRKC, which I'll explain that a little bit to you, but I actually can't, I realized like about 15 minutes ago that my PowerPoint is not updated. And so I'll send the PRKC out to everybody, but I don't have the PowerPoint with it. But what that is the PRKC is what we call the 4-H Professional Research Knowledge and Competencies. And that is really our guideline of what are competencies that 4-H professionals should have in order for them to be successful professionals in the field. And, you know, knowing that you're not going to have all of those competencies at one time, before it was revised, there were 256 of those competencies. And so obviously, you know, nobody can have all 256 at one, I've been doing this now 24 years and I'm not even close to having half of the competencies that you need, that they say you could have. But they're just a guideline. One of the pieces, and what that is they're broken down into what we call domains. And so there are 6 domains. So the field of domains are their youth development, which is really understanding how young people grow and learn. The youth program development, which is really creating that quality experience for young people. There's volunteerism, access, equity, and opportunity. Partnerships, which is uniting younger youth and adults together for stronger communities. So that's really what we consider the youth adult partnerships area. And then organizational systems. And so that's really on connecting those people and the priorities. So with that, there is also a self-assessment that goes with that. That self-assessment I'm going to be sharing with everybody probably in the next couple of weeks, because I want to use that to gauge where we are as a state as a whole, and then also kind of guide that to where we think professional development might need to happen. And so just a little bit of history. This framework was actually created in 1985 by by the National Association of Extension 4-H agents, and it was by their Professional Development Committee. It was revised in 2004 by a team, both coming out of the National Committee. And then in 2017, we just had a new revision come out. And that's why I said I realized that the PowerPoint was not updated, and I apologize for that. But that was actually came out of a USDA and National 4-H Council. There is a 4-H professional development working group, and from that, that's where the PRKC was revised. It took about 2.5 years for that revision to happen, but we just rolled it out, I think about, really the final version of it was rolled out in October, November timeframe. So, but I will be sharing that with you so you can get a better feel. If you look at the 4-H, if you look at the agenda that I sent out, beside each one of the topics, it says youth program development, youth development. I've tried to tie everything back into the PRKC. So we're going to start with just a quick introduction. Sorry, I lost you guys. This does this to me. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you with the PowerPoint. So, and as you have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. With this system, it doesn't allow for the, unfortunately for the sorry, it doesn't allow for you to unmute, or I can unmute you at one point, but feel free to type it in the chat box. And Sunny and Sandy, if you can just quickly type your name in the chat box, you should be able to find it on the bottom screen. just so I've got that record of who's on. But what we're going to do is start with, I'm going to start with the highest level. Today is really the structure and what makes 4-H kind of unique from the other youth development programs that we have. And so I'm going to start with the largest, well, probably not the largest, but what I think is probably one of our biggest partners, and that is the land-grant university. Now, I know most of you probably know that University of Nevada, Reno is the land-grant university in Nevada. But I will say, in my experiences, I was telling somebody one day, I said, I bet I could walk across this campus, and this is any campus, and talk to the students and talk to the professors, and maybe, if we're lucky, half of them actually know what extension is, and know that they are at a land-grant university. Most people have no clue what that means. For those of us in extension and the college, in agriculture, that's something that we learned pretty early on. But so so what is a land-grant university? So a land-grant, it's a college or university that has been designated by state legislature or U.S. Congress to receive the benefits of the Morrill Act of 1862 and 1890, and then there is a third one in 1994. So the original mission of the Morrill Act, or why they came across this, was to teach agricultural, tactical science, or military tactics, and the mechanical arts. So when you see universities like Texas A&M, that stands for Texas Agricultural and Mechanical Arts, or military tactics. It just depends on what the university says. So several of the land-grant universities have taken that A&M. And it's also to offer classical studies that were at a cost that was accessible to the general public, or to the working class. At the time, in 1862, at that point, the only people that could go to college were really from very affluent families. And so this gave the opportunity for anybody to go to college. So what is the Morrill Act? I guess that's always a question. So there was the Morrill Act of 1862, and this was Justin Morrill was the legislature, and I believe he was from Vermont. He provided grants in the form of federal lands to each one of the states to establish their public institution. What they did was each one of them received, I believe it was 30,000 acres per representative they had in DC, and they were able to sell that land, use that money to establish the university, the land-grant university. It was, like I said, it was really the big picture of it was to provide a broad spectrum, that broad spectrum and that opportunity to the entire population. Then in 1890, they had a second Morrill Act that was geared to, or sought to, extend the higher education by providing additional endowments and additional funding to those states that had in their land-grant university in itself that prohibited the distribution of money, or I'm sorry, it was those that had that made a distinction in race for admissions. So essentially those were historically Black colleges, and most of those are actually in the South. So those were, we call those the 1890 land-grant universities. And then in 1994, they had an amendment to the Morrill Act, or an addition, and they granted land-grant status to 29 Native American tribal colleges. And now the difference between, I learned this last year during our AB 407 discussion, but the difference between the 1862 and the 1890 is they received grant funding. They actually received money from the federal government. 1994 Morrill Act did not have any funding that went with it, but it gave them land grant status. So what that did is allowed them to apply for various grants and those types of things through USDA. So, and then the Morrill Act of 1862 and the Morrill Act of 1890, they have separate funding streams through USDA. So that's a little bit of the difference. So as we look at this, this is a map of the 1862 land grant universities. Every state has one that is designated the 1862. And then you add in the 1890s. So this is, you can see, and actually they've added in a new one in Ohio, and I can't think of the name of that university, but there is a now one in Ohio, and there might have been another one added at some point. Actually, I am trying to think, maybe not. And then I'm going to give you, okay, so here's a map of the 1994 tribal colleges, or the 1994 land grants. As you can see, most of them are in the upper Midwest. When I was in Michigan, I actually had the opportunity, if you can see that one that's in the Upper Peninsula called Bay Mills Community College, that actually was in my home, or in the county that I worked in. And so I got to see a unique perspective of working with a 1994 land grant. It did not have necessarily an extension program. What they had was an extension liaison. So they had one person that worked for cooperative extension. When I was in North Dakota, you can see all of them in North Dakota. The one, Turtle Mountain Community College, had a pretty strong extension program. They had a youth development component, not necessarily a 4-H program. I mean, they were working towards that, but not quite there. And then just here's a map of all of them together. And you can see we also have land grant universities in the U.S. territories as well. So American Samoa and Micronesia, the Northern Marianas and Guam, and then also Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. In the West, we have the four that you see down in the box on the left-hand side. Those are part of our Western region. And so we actually they actually are starting to get more involved. Last week when we were in Las Vegas for the meeting for state program leaders, we actually had representatives. I believe that the Micronesia program leader was there, and then I think maybe the Northern Marianas were there as well. So it was kind of cool to have that interaction and to get their feedback. And then our meeting that we're having this summer for the Western region, they're actually going to be coming. I think we're getting Guam, Micronesia. I think most of them are coming. And then in the South, they have Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So the purpose of the land grant university is the endowment, the support, and the maintenance of at least one college where the leading objective is, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, it's, to include the military tactics, to teach branches of learning such as agriculture and mechanical arts. So they really wanted things that were usable for the general public. So from the land grant university, once those were established, they saw a need to really, they're doing all this great stuff. They needed money for research as well. So in 1887, they established the Hatch Act established the agricultural experiment stations and that program. So under that act, the money that was appropriated was to be used for agricultural research. And, most of you know that is still very functional to this day. There is still a strong agricultural research program. And then, so we're doing all this great research. People are coming to the university. They're getting all this great education. But now we need to figure out how to take that and take it out to the general public. So in 1914, they established the Smith-Lever Act. And that is where, the Smith-Lever Act established the cooperative extension system. So this was how they then took the research out to the people. And what is interesting is, you can see this last bullet point, cooperative extension is a key component of the largest delivery system in the world, the land-grant university. So essentially the land-grant university system is the largest delivery system of research out, that is out there. So, that is a very, very basic. Within the cooperative extension, everybody knows that 4-H is part of cooperative extension. And so that's where I'm gonna go next, is to actually talk about 4-H youth development and how that fits in. But there are two websites that I think are really good if you wanna know kind of a history of both cooperative extension and of the land-grant system. As you can see, there's quite a bit on the history of the land-grant system, because in 2014, we celebrated 100 years of cooperative extension across the country. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that just for a moment. Does anybody have any questions about that? I know it's pretty quick, but... All right, so now I'm going to share with you about 4-H and how that fits into, and talk about the history of 4-H. I think it's always important as a staff person to understand kind of where we came from, the changes that have been made to 4-H, and why we're moving in the direction that we're moving in. So I'm going to, this PowerPoint is sorry, I'm getting the chat box up so I can see if anybody has any questions. So this is a history, a national history of 4-H, and I think it's, we've come a long ways in the last 100+ years. It depends on what state you're in, but most states founded their 4-H program between federally, the national 4-H started in 1904, and then states picked up on that after that. So, 1902, sorry, it was 1902. So we are the largest youth development organization with over 6,000 youth. Our history is really to help young people gain leadership skills and find ways to give back. One of the things that they found that 4-H does differently than most of the other youth organizations is our contribution to our community. That's such a priority in our program. And it's something that we really need to be teaching our instilling in our volunteers to make sure that they have that component within their 4-H program. But you can see by the late 1890s, the 4-H programs had started as boys and girls clubs. They really can't, there's a lot of debate on who can be credited for that, but there's really not one individual. In 1901, Ohio promoted the vocational agriculture and out-of-school clubs. And then in 1902, A.B. Graham formed a club of boys and girls that had the officers, the projects, those types of things. Now, I will tell you that Ohio and Iowa will fight they will fight to the death of who had 4-H first. But if you look at the history, they really say A.B. Graham, who was out of Ohio, was the person that formed those programs. So here's a picture of that first 4-H club. Notice that they're almost all boys, but they said it was boys and girls. In 2007, the first emblem was nationally recognized. That was the three-leaf clover. You can see those examples. The head, heart, hands. And then in 1911, there was a suggestion to add hustle as a fourth H. And so they adopted the fourth, and made it a four-leaf clover with the H's in it. And then later that year, they decided hustle probably wasn't the best term to use, so they replaced that with help. So you can see that the clover since 1911 has stood for head, heart, hands, and health. And I personally think that that the four-leaf clover looks much better than the three-leaf clover. So in that second decade, so by 1918, that the 4-H club was used, the term 4-H club was used for the first time in a federal document. And it was in 1921 that there was a National Committee on Boys and Girls Club work that was formed. So that's kind of the precursor for our 4-H national headquarters. After World War I, 4-H really started to focus on becoming more organized. Instead of everybody kind of doing their own thing, they really wanted to have more of a national system. That was 4-H, National 4-H Club Congress grew into 2 annual national tours. They do not do that anymore. There actually still is a National 4-H Congress, but it looks very different than it did back then. And then in 1924, that's when our 4-H name and emblem was patented. So in 1927, the state 4-H leaders adopted our 4-H pledge and our 4-H motto. This is actually, as I look at this, when it was adopted in 1927, that is the incorrect version, and you'll find out why later. But, that's where I pledge my head to clear thinking, my heart to greater loyalty, my hands to larger service, and my health to better living for my club, my community, and my country was what was adopted in 1927. And then that is also where we adopted our 4-H motto, to make the best better. It's amazing how how that has lasted all of these years. So in the fourth decade of 4-H, this is where they started to expand 4-H activities. But during World War II, that expansion really was halted. They established 7 goals. The National 4-H program established 7 goals to help with World War II, and 3 of those directly dealt with producing more food. So by the end of 1942, 4-H had enrolled 650,000 new members, and a lot of those were enrolling so that they could help with the war efforts. So 1943, we had reached 1.6 million youth at that point, which is a large number. And 1945, the amount of completed 4-H projects was over 76%. This was back when, we really kept track of the 4-H projects that were completed, that were, went through the whole system. And then they also, worked on, this is a picture of our 4-Hers collecting essentials for wartime efforts. So by the 6th decade, this is where Asia, Europe, and Latin America had started to establish 4-H programs. You can see, and it was in 1959 that the National 4-H Center in Chevy Chase was dedicated. What that was it was a former college that they had purchased and formed National 4-H Council, or the National 4-H Center, which continues to house our private partner, National 4-H Council. And we still have very strong 4-H programs in other countries. So by the 7th decade, the Extension Committee on Organization, which is what we now, at that time I'm not sure what it was called, we now call that ECOP, which is Extension Committee on Organizational Policy. And the 4-H subcommittee agreed to encourage participation by minorities in national 4-H events. Things have come a really long way, and I think it's, you know, it's amazing how far it's come. But in Chicago, they had a national workshop that was designed for disadvantaged youth that expanded, you know, it was both the urban and the rural. So in 1973, this is why I said, you know, the pledge was not quite right. They added "and my world" to the pledge. And just a little interesting note about that. Pete Olson, who is a county commissioner in Churchill County, was actually in the delegation in DC that, as a 4-H member, that voted to add the "and my world" to the pledge. So it's kind of cool because he takes pride in that and tells us all, you know, tells us about it, and what a cool thing to be involved in. Membership in 4-H grew to 7 million youth in 1974. And then when you get into our 90th year, so this is kind of the 80s and the 90s, this is when we were really starting to explore technology, really getting into the tech. There was a focus on the national extension initiatives. They did a study, 4-H alumni, to find out what the impact of the long-term impacts of the program were. I don't know exactly what those, but essentially they found that 4-H had a powerful effect for decades after a person. And then now, today, we know that 4-H wasn't born overnight. You can see the variety of things that have happened over the last 100+ years. You know, we're still developing, we're still bringing programs that are relevant to our youth. And what we're finding is, as long as we keep everything, really what the program is or what that project is just it's just a tool that we use to get the kids in the program so that we can then teach them the life skills, teach them the communication, teach them the contribution. And then there's some really good history about 4-H, and so you can go and look at that. Any questions about the history of 4-H? Okay, everybody's quiet. Now I'm actually going to share with you, and I know Sandy and I know, I know Sandy and I know Sharon have seen this PowerPoint before, but it's okay. If I say something wrong, please just jump in the notes, let me know. But I've been learning about the history of Nevada 4-H. So this is PowerPoint. Good, I'm glad. It's always good to see Sharon. So we have got, so in 2012 or 14, probably 14, Nevada had celebrated their 100-year anniversary, and so I think it was 2014. So they actually put together a PowerPoint of the history of Nevada 4-H. So I think it's just fitting that we go from the history of the national to what's happened in Nevada. So federal legislation, established extension, cooperative extension was established in Nevada in 1914. And the mission, again, you can see, was to diffuse that useful and practical information to agricultural and home economics. What they started out doing was they had this great research on how to increase corn production, how to get more bushels to the acre. And so but none of the farmers were adopting it. So what they did is figured out, hey, if we can teach the kids these techniques, then they can then turn around and teach their parents. And the same thing with food preservation. They were finding new techniques, so there wasn't as much botulism and as much things that can kill you show up. And so so that's how they really, that's how 4-H got its start, and that's really how cooperative extension kind of got its start, was getting that information out. But they just found that the parents weren't adopting it, so let's teach our kids these skills. So Extension's first employee in Nevada was Norma Davis, and she was actually housed, excuse me, she was actually housed, or I can't really figure out where she was housed. Like, nobody really, I think I've heard Churchill and I've heard Washoe, but you can see she really was, her job was to teach 4-H youth, across the state, and she put in 6,000 miles in her first year. Imagine that vehicle that, that she's sitting next to, and driving 6,000 miles in that across the state of Nevada. I think about, when I first started here, I did my tour of the state and visited all of the counties, and I was in my comfy car with air conditioning, with, I could have my radio, I could have, and it was like 3,000 miles, I think, or something like that. And so I can just imagine what, but that was some dedication on her part. And then we had, there were Boys and Girls Clubs started. So this was a long time Elko County agent that was also a 4-H'er, and, showed their poultry at the state fair in Fallon. And then the first yearly reports in Nevada started being recorded in 1915. And man, I wish I could go back and find those. I always just think I'm one of those data geeks too, and I like to look at all of the statistics. But you can see, at that time we had 829 4-H members, and 169 completed their projects. At that point, that's probably all they were collecting in information at the federal level. And now we don't even collect the number of projects that are completed. And so 1916, the 4-leaf clover was well known. They knew that. We had ag agents and home demonstrators, that's what our extension educators were called at the time, that worked in Lyon, Washoe, Elko, Douglas, and Clark counties. And the first ag agent in the north was Joe Wilson, and he served central and northern Nevada until 1946. So you can see, what kind of programs that he presented. And then the first ag agent in the South was in 1916. They had a gentleman that taught youth horticulture. And then, really focused in on the horticulture. And as I look back, I think back on it now, and, pretty similar. A lot of our northern area educators focus on livestock and focus on kind of the ag side of things. And a lot of our programming in the southern area is focused on horticulture and those kinds of programs. So not a lot has changed in that 100 years. So 4-H during World War I, we had 9 counties that had ag agents, home demonstration agents, or county club agents. So a county club agent would have been a 4-H person. They were not considered, a lot of times they were called junior agents, and it was like really exciting that you got to become an ag agent, and but their emphasis during that time was on food production. As I mentioned in the national, that's really where the focus of 4-H went during the war. They would grow fresh fruits and vegetables for canning, really trying to improve their health at home. And then they reached, at that point, 1 out of every 5 people in Nevada with youth and livestock programs. And also, I love this, to improve the sanitary conditions in the home. That would be an interesting topic to do nowadays. And then this is really when the Farm Bureau began working with Extension. That partnership was formalized in 1919 by the Nevada legislature. where they adopted the 1 mil tax, and and that's what has funded extension. And to this day, that's what partially funds extension. So during the 20s, we saw the youth enrollment increase a tremendous amount when we started going into the schools, and the county agents were to devote a third of their time to the Boys and Girls Club work. That Boys and Girls Club, when you see it here, that's the 4-H work. So during the 20s as well, they were active in livestock, clothing, and home economics. The ag production expand cattle to 500,000 cattle and 1 million sheep in the state. And you can see at that point, it's really interesting, complete opposite of what's happening today, but many of the children were dangerously underweight. And think about during the 20s, what was happening. There was a depression going on, and kids were not getting nutrition that they needed at home. And so really a lot of the focus at that point was on good nutrition and how do you feed your kids. So again, you can see during that time, that's when the home demonstration agents are family consumer science agents, or children, youth, families, and community educators now. They stepped up that education and to improve the nutrition in low-income families. And then that's where they began those leadership opportunities and community service. So in the 30s, our 4-H numbers were down, but we're coming out of the Depression, really starting to look at possibly going to war again. And so the numbers were down, but many of our young people in Nevada would take their animals to the California livestock shows and sell their animals there, which would in turn bring in, a lot of money in our local communities. So then we have 4-H camp. So our first, we had our first 4-H camp at the University Farm that was south of Reno, now what is Mackey Field. And a third of the state's members attended. They paid $2.50 to attend 4-H camp. Wouldn't it be nice if we could charge that now? So Tom Buckman was the assistant director, and he negotiated with the Park and the Rabe families, who were Douglas County property owners, and then the Farm Bureau to purchase and have donated what is now our 4-H camp at Lake Tahoe. So if you don't know the history of that 4-H camp, it was the land was sold to the Nevada Farm Bureau at an extremely reduced rate from the family, and then Farm Bureau then in turn donated it to 4-H and FFA so that we would have a permanent place to hold our camps. And then the Park family then came along a few years later and donated the beachfront property. And so that's why we have the camp that we have now. So 1938, that was, you can see the strip of land that we had. It did become university property at that time. So the university does own that property. And it is, continues to be where our 4-H camp is located. And on the one side, there's still the golf course. You can see the person still golfing. And then on the other side, where you see kind of the little buildings, those are now condos by the Tahoe Beach Club. And you can see these are pictures before they had the cabins there. They slept in tents. It's always interesting to listen to our camp board members that talk about sleeping in the tents at camp. We had our first Nevada Junior Livestock Show in 1939. You can see that is, cattle have changed a lot in the last few years. And then during World War II, Extension was named the official agency for education for farmers and homemakers. I think that was really, really showed the impact that we had on the education. And of course, our priorities within that time were similar to the national priorities. The kind of similar to what happens today. We have our priorities, but then we also have the national priorities that we work towards. So 4-H clubs, this is one in Douglas County. They were able to, this club in Douglas County brought in enough scrap iron to build 4 tanks for the armed forces. So those were examples of community service that they were doing during that time. In 1942, the 4-H newsletter reported all of the wartime efforts. You can see, the Churchill Happy Harmonizers collected materials, and the club prepared their members to serve their country. That was the other piece, is we were teaching our young people the skills that they needed to then turn around and serve their country. You can, the Food for Freedom effort, the Victory Gardens increased by 50%, and the 4-H club projects were related to food production and conservation. So post-war saw that growth in 4-H membership and ag production. It just makes me laugh looking at the pictures of cattle. Obviously these are a little bit younger, but back then they were short and squatty, and that's how they liked them, and fat. You can see that, there was, Kirk Day was an agronomist, and he served in Humboldt County from 1947 to 1976. He was, one of them credited for bringing electricity to ranchers for getting upgrades in irrigation systems, promoting seed production, and the importance of vaccinating calves. Here is the he started the 4-H clubs in Paradise Valley, Winnemucca, McDermott, Norvada. I'm kind of laughing at that because I think he could have had some of my relatives that were from Norvada and McDermott in 4-H back then. That was about when they were living there, when my dad was a little boy. And then we move into the 50s. This is a 4-H member from Douglas County that exhibited. This was the grand champion beef at the California Hereford Show in 1952. Could you imagine if that showed up today in our shows? And then here is the Las Vegas educator that was served from 1958 to 1976. And, you can see he was a former 4-H member, which was kind of a cool thing. And then he helped to be able to develop those, develop more youth programs in the Las Vegas area. Here's another educator from the 60s, served 30 years. And then in the 70s, our membership continued to grow. Here's a picture of the Western Counties junior 4-H camp. A lot of kids went to 4-H camp. And then in 1982, Nevada hosted the Western Regional 4-H Leadership Conference. That looks like it was up at Tahoe, and that continued for a long time. In fact, I've had people go, well, we need to get that teen program back up and going at Lake Tahoe. So, it could be something in the future that we try to bring back. A lot of the other states are asking. So we had a, livestock specialist looking at educating youth and ranchers on how to produce healthier products. Staying Alive was, an urban Las Vegas latchkey program. We all know in the 80s there was the big latchkey kid, and so 4-H did a lot of programming in that area. And then this was, so Marilyn Smith who is actually not officially retired yet. She will actually retire on March 31st. She, at this point in the 80s, had started working in the area of youth at risk. And in 1989, created a program called Project Magic for juvenile offenders. And this program is actually still up and running, both in Nevada and across, in many other counties. I know Maryland has been asked, she gets asked all the time to go out and do training in other places on this program. And it's been set up to where it will continue after she retires. In 1993, this is when the University Board of Regents recognized cooperative extension as a separate college. So Sharon and Sandy know all the history of all of that, but where we've got, we were a separate college until October of last year, October of, 16, must have been October of 16, when it was made official that we were put back into the College of Agriculture, or Kavner College of Agricultural, blah, 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 Biotechnology and Natural Resources. In 1998, the extension director was Karen Hinton. She retired in, I don't remember, 2012. Does that sound right, Sharon and Sandy? I can't remember. It was either 2010 or 2012. I was thinking it was 12. And then followed by Dr. Mark Walker, and then we just hired Ivory Lyles, who is in November. So, and you can see this is a program highlight from 2003, where they, cooperative extension was your gateway to the university. I always say our job is to help us fulfill some of our, of our mission to the outreach into the communities. 4-H after school programs are still up and going strong. This is really, they're strong in almost every county, but, I love this one. They're separating DNA from an onion as part of the field of genes curriculum. And there's so much science, so much STEM programming that's going on. That's probably our one of our top programming areas now, because that's what draws in kids. And then, we still do a lot of, we've extended not only the youth development programming to not only our youth, but also to families. One of our big programs is the Heart and Shield program that's out of Elko and Churchill counties, that deals with families who are victims of domestic violence. And they work with the families to help so that is, the circle is broken. And then, we know that our animal projects are alive and going. We still have almost 20,000 livestock or animal science projects throughout our state. Still a big one. And then, there was lots of centennial activities. I was not here during the centennial, but I know, I always heard heard stories of it, as well as, I've been involved in other states' centennial activities. All right. And then, we always have to remain vital as we look at our past and move into the future. We have to keep everything, keep it in mind that we've got to stay relevant to the needs of today's youth, and whatever that looks like is important. Okay. So now I want to share with you a little bit about, so you have an understanding of the organizational structure of 4-H. And it took me a long time to figure this out, because there's so many different levels in it. What level is it important? What, at what level do you go to for what? So, okay, oops. Okay, so the organizational structure of 4-H. So there is 5 entities essentially that make up the 4-H program. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm getting my chat box back over there. So it's made possible through the cooperative efforts of cooperative extension, or of, sorry, USDA, which within the United States Department of Agriculture. Under that is NIFA, the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, that's housed in Washington, D.C. There's also that is the federal partnership. Then we have our state partnership with both the land-grant university, so University of Nevada, Reno, as well as the state government. So we do receive state appropriated dollars. And then we have a partnership with the counties and the county governments. And then we do have a private arm as well for foundations, both at the federal and at the at the state level. So at the national level, we have the USDA, which is the congressionally approved home for which 4-H resides. So that is administered, USDA is administered by the Secretary of Agriculture, that is a political appointment. If you don't know, that is Sonny Perdue, and we have been very fortunate in Nevada. He has already visited Nevada once, and he was just appointed, not very long ago. And he visited Las Vegas about a month ago, I guess. We had about 2 days notice that he was coming. We were able to, the efforts of the Las Vegas crew, they were able to pull together youth. He requested that we have 4-H youth at the event, and so we had 4-H youth come in and serve lunch to him, or serve lunch to the program. And so we had a great, our 4-H youth represented represented our program very, very well. Underneath USDA is NIFA, the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and this is one of many agencies within USDA. There are 6 units within NIFA, and that is administered by a director, and that person right now is Sonny Ramaswamy. My understanding is Sonny's appointment is, and that's a political appointment as well. My understanding is Sonny's appointment is up in, I believe, May, and there's been no word about who that might be. But within NIFA, there is the Institute for Youth, Family, and Community, and so that's one of the 6 units. Within that, there is the Division of Youth and 4-H, and then the National 4-H National Headquarters. And we do have a National 4-H program leader, or National 4-H administrator, and her name is Lisa Loxman. I can't really call her a national program leader because within USDA, she is head of the National 4-H headquarters, or 4-H National Headquarters, sorry. And then within that, there are national program leaders for specific areas. So there's one that does policy and program and policy leadership. There's another one that does professional development and volunteer development. There's another one that does STEM programming. There's another one that does vulnerable populations. And so those are what we call national program leaders. And then at the land-grant university, we have got, that is, that's our partnership with our state partner. And we do have a variety of colleges. Our university president is Mark Johnson. And I will tell you, I've had some great conversations in probably the last 2 months with President Johnson about 4-H. He is super supportive of 4-H. It makes me happy to hear that. I know in the past he hasn't been as necessarily, as supportive of the extension program, but I feel very comfortable with where he is with 4-H. Within cooperative, we are housed within the College of Agricultural, Biotechnology, and Natural Resources. I needed that in my CABNR. I know it's wrong. I've got to change that. There's no E in CABNR, but we fit under that. And we do have our director, that is our director of extension, that is Ivory Lyles, and I report directly to Ivory. And then within that, we have our 4-H program. And so there is the 4-H UI. I don't know why. Okay. We have our state 4-H office, which currently right now is myself and Francis. And then we have a grad student, Brian, that does help us out on a grant that we have. And then we have our extension educators and our 4-H coordinators and community-based instructors. So then at the county level, this is where, probably our biggest partnership is. We have, we work with our county commissioners very, very closely with the approval of the county funding for extension budgets. We all know that those are elected positions. Then within that, we also have our area directors, and we have 2 area directors. And they work with, they support the counties, they work with the county commissioners, and then they also, do a lot of work supporting the 4-H program. And then our extension educators, those are, essentially the extension educators are really at the county level, they are the ones that are being held responsible for the 4-H program. And, making sure that it is, that it's meeting all of our policies. I know that most of our coordinators are the ones out doing the work, but it is the educators, they're the final kind of at the county level, they are the ones being held responsible. And then our community-based instructors, a lot of times you'll hear me call them 4-H professionals, because I think you guys are all professionals, and you need to be, it's you're the ones doing most of the work. So, and you work with the volunteers as well as the youth and the stakeholders. And then we have our volunteers. Okay. And then we have the private side. So this is where on the private side is where we can raise money from private resources. So on the national level, we have National 4-H Council, and they give a lot of grants out to states. We are currently in Nevada. We have 2 different grants. Well, no, I guess we only have 1 grant right now, but we have received, multiple grants over the years through them. They also are working with, really promoting, if you've seen the 4-H Grows Here campaign, all of our national campaign, they are the ones that are leading that effort. When we have our marketing training in a couple of weeks, we actually have a representative from National 4-H Council that will be coming and helping with that marketing training, because that is part of what they do. And then at the state level, we currently do not have a 4-H foundation or any kind of endowment board or anything. We've been, Ivory and I, Dr. Lyles and I have been in conversation about trying to figure out what we can do, because we do know that we need to raise money. We can't, we can't sustain on what we get from the state. And so we've got to figure out a way to raise private dollars. The other one is we're getting ready to do a huge capital campaign for the 4-H camp, like between $10 and $40 million. We want to raise to make improvements at the camp. And so to do that, we know that, he and I can't do it alone. We know that the University Development Office can't do it alone. So we need a committee to work on that. So we're trying to figure out, but right now, everything that we do as far as fundraising, there is a development office on campus that we work with quite frequently, and they are in the process, I believe, of hiring a development person specifically for Cabner, and a large portion of their time is for extension. Okay, any questions about that? I know this is kind of information overload today. Okay, the last PowerPoint I have to share with you is a little bit about what's happening within 4-H in Nevada. Whoops. I was trying to get the chat box back up. Okay. Oh, I haven't shared my screen. That's why I can't get it. Okay, there we go. Okay. So just to kind of share where we're at in Nevada as far as 4-H, I think it's important to know where we are. So our statement of purpose, this was a statement that was put together, and it is 4-H youth development is an age-appropriate, positive youth development program that helps shape future leaders and innovators through research-driven, hands-on learning activities that focus on academic and career readiness. Now, I know for those of you that were at our meeting this fall, that's a lot. That's kind of the academic version. We did come up with kind of a tagline that is enriching. Now I can't remember it. I'm gonna have to look it up again. It's like enriching lives, empowering communities, I think is what we ended up coming up with, so we could have it, quick, succinct, what we do. But I just wanted to share with you briefly kind of what our final numbers were for last year. So we did reach roughly about 52, almost 53,000 youth in Nevada last year. Each county has their own, but this is statewide. Those were all youth reached. And if you take out the kids that are in multiple programs, then it is about 43, almost 44,000 youth. We're about 50-50 on gender. It's pretty split. Our largest programming area is our junior age, grades 3 through 5. Does that surprise anybody out there at all? Didn't surprise me at all. The one thing I was really excited about, though, is we actually had a pretty significant increase in our intermediates and our seniors, like almost 1,000 kids in our senior division is the number of senior youth. So to me, I think that is fantastic. I'm super excited about that. And then the other category, and I'm not sure I've got to figure out how people are defining that, because if it says not in school, we have a huge number that are not in school. And I'm wondering if people are not counting their homeschool kids in that category, which they really shouldn't be. They should be in, that category is really for, thank you, Sharon. Nevada 4-H, empowering communities, enriching lives. That's exactly what it was. I just had them opposite. Anyway, I've just got to figure out where that, what that is. One of the sessions that that's going to be one of these orientation sessions is enrollment and reporting. So I'm going to talk about what we need to report where. And I think that one's coming up pretty soon. So we have about, you can see about 86,000 of our youth are in our rural, what we consider rural, and almost 40,000 are in urban. That's urban and suburban, but it's all kind of considered urban. We have about 19,000 youth. That was up significantly in Latino youth. And then, you can see our largest percentage of race is white. Now they may be Latinos, but they for ethnicity, but then race is white. We did have a huge increase in our other numbers, which is great. And then you can see our volunteers. We have about 4,300 volunteers. Of those, 3,400 are adult volunteers. Then we have about almost 900 teen volunteers. And then here's our delivery modes. We have about 4,600 that are in clubs, in the 4-H clubs program. I would really like to get that over, I'd love to see us at some point get over 10,000 in the club program. And there's ways that we can do that. And we're going to be talking about that in the coming year of how we can increase those club numbers. Part of it is going to be looking at the definition of what is a club and how do we redefine what constitutes a club while still fitting in the national guidelines, which can be done. But we have about, you can see those numbers. We've got, a significant number that are in school, and then the short-term or special interest programs as well. So our current structure right now is, you can see our extension director is Dr. Lyles, and then I report directly to Dr. Lyles along with the area directors. We have 2 area directors, one in the north and one in the south. Currently, there is a 4-H camp director. I mean, there's always going to be a 4-H camp director. Right now, that person is camp worker, but he actually will retire on March 31st. And so we're right now in the process of hiring a temporary position. And I don't have Frances on here, but off of the state 4-H director, we do have Frances on, who is she is 25% administrative assistant and 75% event management. So our staff is growing, and then I just started the process today to try to hire a temporary part-time person. It's not through, I have some funding through a grant to run our teen leadership programs. So trying to get somebody to really focus in on that and try to get a real cohesive group going. But underneath the area directors, we do have our extension educators and our state and area specialists. And then underneath the extension educators is the community-based instructors. And for Stormy, she doesn't necessarily have that same structure because there's not an extension educator. I know she's on here, but there's not an extension educator in that county. So actually, I end up supervising, or I supervise Stormy and Carol in Nye County. So just kind of briefly the roles and responsibilities, because this is always kind of a question, where do I go and, who do I? So we have it's actually not dean and director, it's an associate dean and director now. They are responsible for assuring that the programs align with the current and the future university goals. It's really kind of cool because I didn't realize it because it was put into place before I came on board, but they had in the university strategic plan, 4-H is actually specifically mentioned. And so, that's something that the director then informs me of some of those pieces. And then we work on trying to figure out how that looks. And then there's the state 4-H program leader, program director. And so my job is really to provide leadership to make sure we have program coherence, that we're expanding, we're marketing, evaluating, and professional development. And so those things, when I'm looking at it, when I talk about, okay, let's see what a statewide teen leadership program looks like. What we're trying to do is build something that's more cohesive. So, everybody, we're moving in the same direction, and our kids are all getting the same skills. And then we have our area directors. They really support the teaching activities, and the work that the 4-H professionals are doing, the coordinators and our community-based instructors, as well as our extension educators. Again, it's kind of those same pieces. The other thing is they're supposed to be working, especially with the extension educators, to make sure that there are pieces of this in their evaluation. I don't think that necessarily happens all the time, but this is taken right out of a document that was put together right before I was hired called Shifting the Culture, and it's a strategic, kind of a basis for a strategic plan of where we want to move. And so this is one of those. It talks about the different roles. So you can see that the extension educator, their job is to ensure that the 4-H program is conducted and that their counties align with the statement of purpose and those core features. They're responsible. They're supposed to be working with their counties to market the 4-H program in their county, and then if they can, across the state. And our community-based instructors, do you notice you guys have the largest position, the largest description of your roles and responsibilities? It's because it just kind of makes me laugh, because you are supposed to be working in, everything. And so, and I totally know that. And working with the volunteers, essentially, our program is our volunteers are very, very essential. But it's important, I think, for you guys, as community-based instructors, that you guys know that essentially, it's our feet as 4-H and extension professionals. It's our feet that are held to the fire for most things. That even if it's a volunteer that does something, that's why we need to make sure our volunteers get their training and that they're up to speed, and they give us advice. They give us it's also important to know that the volunteers don't run the program. We run the program with the help of the volunteers. They are advisory, and I think that that's really, really critical to establish from the beginning. So these are just some quotes that I like. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others remain immortal. As I go through this career, I think, I really try to keep those types of things in the back of my mind. It doesn't matter what I do. For me, it's gone when I'm gone. But if I can establish a great structure and I can establish a good foundation, then I know that this program is going to continue well beyond my lifespan. So as we look at, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with this, but I want to share with you kind of an idea about youth development. There's what we call content and context. So the content is, you can see, those are the education. So that's like your science, your STEM, your healthy lifestyles, your citizenship. That's the topic area. And then we have the context, which is really our youth development principles. And within that, we've come up with what we call the essential elements. And I'm going to go into more detail about the youth development theory, the essential elements, and all of those pieces in another session. But essentially, just remember, those are 4 of them: belonging, independence, generosity, and mastery. So within that, the reason I wanted to show this is because you can see the different delivery modes. And there's been quite a bit of research on this, and where we look at, and all of our delivery modes are critical to our programming, but what they found is the club program really gives young people the best experience within the 4-H program. So that's where they have high content and high context. As long as we make sure our volunteers are trained in those aspects, as long as our volunteers are holding meetings and the kids are learning those skills and parliamentary procedures, they're giving demonstrations at their club meetings, so they're learning how to speak in front of people, that they learn they have that service to community, so they're actually out giving back to their community and learning those skills. What I have found, and this is, it's nothing, I found this across the country, is so many times it's let's just get the project done and move on. To me, that shows that, okay, they just want the money at the fair, or, they're not doing the true club experience. Our after-school programs are pretty high. They have a higher context and content, but they don't have as much, because they are getting, you try to incorporate some of those pieces into the after-school program. And then our camp programs are really pretty high in context, and not as high in content, because we're, it's fun and let's have a good time, and, they're getting content, but it's, they're getting smaller dosages of it. And then our school enrichment, really, they're getting high dosage of content, but not a lot of, they're not getting some of those life skills that we would teach in the club program. That's one of the reasons why we really try to encourage you, when you have a school enrichment program, which I think are critical, but let's share with them the other opportunities that we have in 4-H. And then our special interest and short term, a lot of times, again, they're high context but low content, because they're just short snippets of what they get. And then our life skills, obviously you can see life skills kind of fall in there. So oh gosh, I don't remember how long it's been now, but we just concluded, like the last 3 years, concluded a 10-year longitudinal study. So they studied a group of young people for 10 years, not the same kids, but states did a 10-year study, and to find out what it was about 4-H that made it different than other youth organizations. It was done by Tufts University, which is one of the leading research institutes on youth development. And Richard Lerner is probably one of the top researchers in the area of youth development. He's the one that conducted the study for us. And what they found was our 4-H youth are 3 times more likely to contribute back to their communities. They're two times more likely to pursue science, both while they're in high school, while they're in school, and also outside of school. They're 2 times more likely to go to college, and they are less likely to become involved in risky behaviors. So some really good information about what it is about our 4-Hers. So what does it mean to our volunteers? I think it a lot of times we need to really look at our, and make sure our volunteers understand some of these pieces. And so, we look at, this piece, they're an important part of our program. So just some quotes. The more we give importance to skill development, the more competent will be our youth. I think the more often we can give them opportunities to practice some of those, what they call soft skills. I don't think that they're soft skills. I think that they're more important than some of the technical skills. But, more chances that we give them to practice those skills, the more competent they're going to be. When a kid graduates, it's not only that kid and his family that wins, it's the community that wins. As I said, our young people, and I can't remember there is actually a statistic of how many more kids in 4-H graduate from high school. It's like 3 times more likely to graduate from high school. And every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. And alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And then these are not good pictures, I know, but children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. So essentially that is, kind of the end of this presentation today. And I know I've got about 10 minutes just to share with you some of the, next time and I have to look at my agenda again because it's been a while because I changed things around a bunch. But we, each time we're going to build on the different areas. Okay, this is the one I want. Sorry, I'm trying to find my agenda. Next time we're actually going to start looking at the youth development theory. When I started doing these, I kind of got into some of the more specifics, but I think it's really important that as 4-H professionals, you guys have a basic underlying understanding, just a basic understanding of some of the youth development principles. So we're going to talk about ages, it's called developmental levels or ages and stages, what's appropriate. You'll hear me talk a lot about what is developmentally appropriate for the different age groups of youth. One of the reasons why we don't allow clover buds to do certain things is it's not developmentally appropriate for them. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about the asset approach to positive youth development. So what that is if you're familiar with the Search Institute and the developmental assets, 40 developmental assets, we're going to talk briefly about that and how that fits in to providing a positive youth development experience. And then the next session will actually be on talking about targeting life skills. So our life skills model, how do we really intentionally teach some life skills without the kids knowing that they're learning that, and then also the experiential learning model. So that's a method of presentation or teaching that has been very, very successful, and it's kind of our foundation of how we present information within 4-H. And then I'll start getting into more of the nitty gritty. The week of March 26th, it looks like that's when I'm going to talk about the use of the name and emblem. How, you know, because we do have, we are under some federal restrictions about how we can use the name and emblem. And then also about risk management. You know, that's always not a fun topic, but an important topic within 4-H. And then the 4-H, four essential elements. Then the next week we're going to go into enrollment and reporting, and then and we're going to talk about, so when you put stuff into 4-H online, what do you report and where do you report it? You know, where do you report group enrollments versus individual enrollments, and just a variety of things. Some of you may have gone through that in the past, but, and then we're going to talk briefly about evaluating for impact. You know, we're really being held responsible anymore for showing impact of our programs. And so I want everybody to have a basic idea of how do you do some quick evaluations for impact. So we're going to talk about that. And then we'll talk about basic event management. Big part of our job is hosting events. And then service to community, the importance of service to community. And then we'll go into some of the other topics. So hopefully everybody will get at least one thing out of the, I think it's 10 sessions now. Yeah, 10 sessions now. And, you know, get some skills. If there's something that I don't discuss that maybe you want more information on, please let me know, and I can, you know, we can figure out a way to get you that information. So any questions or comments? Everybody, this one's so hard for me because people can't talk. Oh, okay. You have the stamp. Oh, I haven't seen the FFA stamp, but I have the 4-H stamp, the one that was in the one PowerPoint. I've got 2 or 3 versions of it. I want to get one of them framed one of these days. Cody bought a huge thing of stamps one time, like a huge like a bucket of stamps at a flea market or something, and there was like 3 of those 4-H stamps in there. So it was pretty cool. I just have to find them now. They're somewhere in my stuff that's still packed away. So great. Well, thanks, Sharon. I'm glad, you know, it's always good. I think sometimes, you know, you can hear it a few times, but I tend to pick up new things. So thank you, everybody, for participating. And I finished on time, if not a little